the word came down. There was a diversity, as I understand it, this is, pieced together, but there's a diversity task force on the board. There was a retreat, a board retreat that was led by something called the Carl Institute. The Carl Institute is this outfit, one of these outfits that stands for Critical Analysis of Race in Learning and Education. And, they're, influenced by critical theory, I believe. And then they sort of pitched their tent with anti-racism as a philosophy. And they started to, talk to the faculty a little bit. What later became the Office of Community Engagement, which is the sort of the bureaucratic arm that is essentially a sort of ethical priesthood of how to behave properly in the school environment, and how to be a good anti-racist. But they would ask, they had meetings where they would ask us things like, well, what does anti-racism mean to you? And that's a perfectly innocuous question. And to me, I was like, it means not being racist. It means not differentiating, individuals based on the color of their skin, and treating people with respect and dignity, no matter, what their skin color is. And they said, well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, well, and then they just heard people out, and some people had more, I guess I would say, advanced ideas about, being aware of systemic oppression and understanding different perspectives based on how you might assume a child had been, had developed given their circumstances. And those were rewarded, much more. And those are not bad ideas. We haven't got to the bad stuff yet. But it started to become apparent to me. I sort of had the realization that this was really going in the wrong direction when we had a professional development meeting, and they passed out I'm sure you've seen it, the pyramid of racism, also known as the pyramid of white supremacy. And it had a schema. It was a schema arranged in the form of a pyramid with genocide at the top of the pyramid, and then various layers that had categorical names like overt racism, covert racism, minimization, indifference, and then there must have been about 50 or 60 things sprinkled on the pyramid at various levels. And some of the things on the pyramid, I actually thought were, in many cases, virtues. So things like being apolitical, or things like, there are two sides to every story. Things that were contradictory, like, not believing POC, but also thinking, well, my Black friend said ... So the idea that these two things were next to each other seemed interesting to me. Also things that were just, political party platforms, things
minimization.
Like,
we all belong to the human race.
Right. That was a big one.
Post-racial society. Why can't we all just get along? Prioritizing intentions over impact. That's a nice one.
Yeah.
Yes, we could talk about that for about 3 weeks. One.
Yeah.
Not believing experiences of people of color. Two sides to every story. Right. Yeah, well, it's very interesting when you look very carefully at the words that are lumped in with the other words, let's say.
Right.
Guilt by association. Okay, yeah. So you had this pyramid of white supremacy.
Yeah, and I was asked, how do you respond to this? What do you think about this? And I said, I think this is extremely destructive and horrible schema to put in front of a child, and I will never do it. And I think that no. And I went to the office, I said, I'm not teaching this.
And so this was when you were teaching math.
Well, I should explain it. At our school, all the teachers have other duties that are really important. Like you have an advisory, and the advisor shepherds, maybe 8 to 10 kids through the for 4 years. So they come to you with problems and you can help them out. You can help them out academically. So this would have been something that I would needed to share with the advisory. And I think they actually...
And so you registered your objections
I did.
at that point.
This is the first time I kind of registered my objection because I felt...
Why did you do that? I mean, look what you just told me.
Yeah.
Remember what you just told me. You said that at one point in your life, you were like dangerously lost. You found your way out through mentoring. That put you into the education field. Then you got a good job that you liked with people you cared for that was meaningful to you, and it structured your life. And then you bought into this anti-racist movement, let's say. Mm-hmm. But now you decide you're not going to do it. So like, why? You have a lot at stake at this point, a lot. So why? What's bugging you about this so much?
Yeah, I think some things had happened before this where I had spoken to the head of school prior to this and warned him. Because I immediately I was just thinking about anti-racism. That should be a good thing? Why does that bother me? And what bothered me was that I knew that racism was a concept that had undergone enormous creep, that the people had very different ideas about what was and wasn't racist. To some, the American flag was racist. Things that were, perhaps innocuous to some would have been considered racist to others. And then how would you adjudicate what you were actually against? And I saw this as a real threat because it would lead to real problems in determining what it was that you should be anti. And if you frame in your mission something which is anti something vague, you're really setting yourself up for a witch hunt. And I just
especially, so we look at this pyramid of white supremacy, right? And at the top we have genocide. So it's like the ultimate evil. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the ultimate evil. Okay, so then you might say, well, maybe your definitions matter when you're talking about the ultimate evil. And so maybe being vague about exactly what that evil is, especially if it's convenient for you to be vague, perhaps that's a little bit ill-advised. Perhaps particularly when you're teaching children.
Yeah. And I said, well, is this the comprehensive list of things that belong on the pyramid? Are there other things that we don't know that are on the pyramid? And they said, well, there could be. And I said, well, that's nice. So now we have other stuff that's just in the margins that could be thrown onto this pyramid. Who knows what they'll be? Maybe.
And who knows who will decide?
Exactly. Like this is okay. So this list is not exhaustive, and that actually scared me more.
Why?
Well, because it meant that no one could anticipate where the lines were. I mean, kids need boundaries. And so how are the kids supposed to know what is and isn't if they just have this grab bag of all these possible things that could be, associated with the ultimate evil? That it just is setting up this whole tripwire situation where they're just, how are they supposed to know how to trust what is and isn't falling into the schema that comes out of their mouth, or they have a thought, or that they want to articulate it? How you're just setting them up for anxiety and tension, and who it means that you're really, and I began to see this in actual discussions people have about it. Kids were restricting themselves to a very narrow set of things to say that they felt were okay to say, and it was all the jargon. It was saying, well, we need to acknowledge our privilege. Yes, we are privileged. That privilege makes us unable to understand.
Okay, so what you saw as people's attempts to deal with the ambiguity was that they just stopped saying anything that wasn't approved.
Yeah,
because exactly. That is the way out of it, right? If what's negative is ill-defined, but what's positive is listed, then you just stick with the list.
You stick with the list. Yeah, you stick with the list.
And so
then
what's
there
the
were,
problem with that exactly? So the kids stick with the list. Why is that bothering you?
well, it's because it means that, events, the multiplicity of possible reasons for things that change, that are different depending on the actual incident, get reduced to this script of explanations, and only those explanations, fit the paradigm, and only those explanations will be considered. And that means that you're not making sense of the world for yourself.